long blonde. You still have long blonde hair.
Oh, God. Yeah, I've been doing it again. He'll never come back.
And that's your son.
My younger son. He's Daryl's age.
And then,
My other son is married.
and so you
And I have
She has 3
I
grandsons.
told Belinda to tell Maddie that she needs to do what Maddie had that baby calm down way before that.
You should see that.
And she's definitely a trophy wife.
She's
I mean, not literally. She
No,
looks like she
yeah,
could be.
beautiful. I mean, after she had her kitchen to wear a bikini at the skateboard, she's gorgeous. So yeah,
Texas.
this one was this is her
My
daughter.
daughter, I had her.
So, but wait, so oh my God.
Well, no, I was just thinking about basically, you know. Oh, yeah, my mother. And then she told me.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Greetings. I'm excited to welcome you today to Uncanny Appalachia, part of the Virginia Festival of the Book. My name is Stacia Pelletier. I'm a novelist. I do historical fiction. I'm thrilled to be part of this panel. The Virginia Festival of the Book is a program of Virginia Humanities, a statewide organization whose mission is to connect people and ideas to explore the human experience. Most festival events are free of charge, but not free to produce. Your support helps us keep this incredible event going year after year. If you'd like to support the festival, you can give using one of the QR codes located probably somewhere in your swag bag. I'm supposed to see them elsewhere and I don't see them, but find a QR code, you can give that way. I'd like to give a very special thanks to the Virginia Festival of the Book's premier sponsors, Michelle and David Baldacci, who helped make this event possible. I would also like to thank the Anne and Jean Worrell Foundation, Dominion Energy, and the Joseph and Robert Cornell Memorial Foundation. Now before we begin, this is the mandatory please silence your cell phones. I'd also like to encourage you to be aware of your space. Take a look around and note all available exits. I see several signs back there behind us. In the case of emergency, our site coordinator will be on hand to provide assistance. Our site coordinator is back towards the back if you want to wave your hand at everyone. There she is. And as always, if you see something, say something. At the conclusion of this panel, there's a bookseller on site right near the front doors with copies of our authors' latest books, and of mine, I'm supposed to add, you can buy my book as well. Purchasing a book is a great way to support authors and the literary community, and they'll be available to sign a copy for you. Finally, I would like to note that festival authors and speakers and puppets today represent themselves. They do not represent Virginia Humanities or the University of Virginia. So we're going to start today with something very unique and special to the festival. We're going to start with a brief performance by Davy White from the Off Center in Staunton, doing a brief shadow puppetry act that introduces us to the 2 books that we're going to be talking about. So after he does the act, I'll then bring our authors up to the stage and introduce them. And I am also supposed to note that today is International Puppet Day, so it's a fitting moment for our opening performance. I'll get the lights and we'll get started.
Outside the cemetery gate, Emmett cut the engine. The motor idled a few seconds before sputtering to a stop. He leaned over the wheel and glanced up at the sun. "Don't like to admit it," he said, and tugged on his shirt collar, "but your mama might have been right about you staying at the house till closer to time." "I'll be fine," Leonard said. Emmett winked at his son. Okay, let's do it. He pointed to a towering oak, its leaves already hinting at the fiery colors to come. We'll set up over there, in the shade. Emmett helped Leonard from the truck, then pulled a folding chair from the back and turned toward the oak. Leonard steadied himself on the crutches and followed close behind his daddy, every step slow and careful. When his good leg buckled and the crutch gave way, Emmett froze, but did not reach for him. Leonard righted himself, and Emmett smiled. At the oak, he opened the metal chair and dusted it clean with one of June's dish towels. "Sit here," he said. Leonard yanked the tip of his left crutch from a patch of soft ground and did as he was told, glad for a chance to rest. His stump throbbed, and his stomach ached. But he did not complain, not even when a mass of gnats took frenzied aim at his swollen nub, still sutured and bandaged in layers of white gauze. He swatted at the bugs, but they circled back around. After he shooed them away a third time, he gave up and fixed on his daddy, pulling weeds crowding the family's graves. With each tombstone Emmett touched, Leonard called out the name of his ancestor. He knew him by heart, had seen photographs of him in a scrapbook. Most of the men and women held the same gaunt cheeks and tired eyes Leonard saw in his daddy. Till today, they felt more like strangers than kin. Now he was trusting them to take care of a piece of himself. His mama always said that the dead keep a close lookout for the living. A shiver whisking down the spine was proof enough that a spirit was near. Leonard had felt no such chill yet and speculated that the loss of a leg might not be enough to garner their attention. When Emmett finished weeding, he knelt beside one of the smallest headstones, one of a dozen adorned with a little lamb resting on top. Sarah Elizabeth Bush. Leonard tossed her name into a building wind, trying to conjure a picture of the girl missing from the scrapbooks back home. She came to him fuzzy and faint. The child never mentioned in family stories. Emmett's baby sister, who had died of scarlet fever before her 5th birthday. Clutching a bouquet of wild aster, Emmett appeared to be talking to her, maybe even crying. Leonard squinted for a better look. The thought of his strong daddy tearing up made him uneasy. He felt better when Emmett patted the lamb's head, stood, and brushed his pants clean. Another gust of wind, and the sun took cover behind a bank of clouds. Emmett reached for a thermos of water. He held it up. Leonard shook his head. "I'm fine," he hollered back. Emmett carried the thermos to him anyway. "You should drink something," he said. Leonard sipped the cool water while Emmett unloaded the Colemans and folding tables and peppered the lawn with more metal chairs borrowed from the Baptist church. Leonard counted 40 chairs, 41 including his own. "That ain't enough," Emmett said as he set the last one in place. "Folks will just have to stand. Ain't that many coming. Not for a leg." Leonard took another sip. Far away, thunder rumbled closer. "I don't know about that," Emmett said. "It ain't so strange to spot a farmer with a missing finger or two." He held up his hand. "Guess I've been lucky. But not everybody's seen a boy missing a whole leg. You okay with that? Them coming just to gawk?" In the sky, a red-tailed hawk spiraled above the oak before settling on its tallest branch. Through the leafy cover, Leonard caught sight of it preening and fanning its tail. He wondered if the hawk was searching for his next meal, or if he'd come to the hilltop to get a first glimpse of the one-legged boy. "Yeah, I'm okay," he said. He set the thermos on the ground. Emmett rested against the oak, wiping his face with a clean edge of the dish towel. From up here, the world looks perfect, don't it? Leonard surveyed the valley, the 100 acres of dimpled pastures his daddy farmed, clutch of rooftops and steeples farther to the west. The waters of Big Sugar River winding between them. Friends' homes scattered like seed. From the hilltop, Leonard could see everyone and everything he loved. Yeah, Daddy, it's perfect. Emmett smiled. All right, just one more thing to do. He tossed the cloth under a folding chair and walked back to the truck. His perfectly starched shirt soaked with sweat. At the tailgate, he bowed his head as though offering up a short prayer, but Leonard knew better than that. His daddy was not a church-going man. Emmett bit his lower lip as he hefted a small box onto his shoulder. Leonard quivered at the side of the box shaped from scraps of pine. He'd come to the hilltop to bury his leg because of a gnawing in his gut. A strong tugging that pulled him to this very spot. He couldn't explain it any better than that. But now every bit of him twitched and squirmed, and he wondered if his leg might be twitching inside that box too. Suddenly he was nervous about the whole idea of a leg funeral. William Thomas Presswood spent much of the vernal equinox of 1808 pulling a cow from a bog. He is 20 and has decided it time to make something of his life. All across Darlington County, South Carolina, seeds are finding purchase. The air heavy and wet, and perhaps William has been imagining those fields turning green in a matter of weeks, thinking about his grandfather's ever-divided land, about his own drunk father, about the thinness of human life, thinking about nothing changing or everything changing. Truth is, some of this life change decision has to do with his sister forever nagging him to take hold of something, to quit floating and reading and thinking, to become a man. The truth is also that some of his life change decision has to do with love, with the tight-chested version of himself he becomes around Mary Norwood. Today, in the mud, pushing a cow, it has been a week since he last saw Mary Norwood, and that exchange had not gone well. It was Sunday, and he rode with her brother Alex to the church meeting. When they set out for home, Alex walked with Mary rather than mounting his horse. William tried to keep pace with them on horseback, but it was difficult. Finally, he asked Mary to climb on, to ride behind them so that they could all carry on their way. This was only logical. Why should she and Alex amble along beside a perfectly capable horse? But William may have also been thinking of how he'd look with Mary Norwood, a woman 6 years his elder, gripping his waist, hair trailing from them both as they made their way home in the Sunday sun. And so began William's recorded life. Later that day, in his first entry, he recounted the rest of the ride home. March 13th. I kept up conversation when I could. After a while, I said, as I can't be of no service to you, I will go. Repented for my awkward conduct. The next day, he plotted out the possible trajectories of his life. March 14th. Rise. Reflected on yesterday's conduct. I swore I would alter my station of life, provoked to it by my sister. Determined one plan of 3 to be executed, viz., either marry MN, or keep bachelor's hall, or travel. 3 possible futures scribbled in ink. Teach, travel, or take the hand of Mary Norwood, pull her up onto his horse, and rush through the fields, the world turning green in their wake as they charged toward the coast. His parents, arm in arm, looking happy for once, waving goodbye. Of course he chooses Mary. Mary will become his life. He set it in ink. And so he is knee-deep in a bog on a Tuesday with a mud-stuck cow belonging to her father. He's putting in work. The next day, William hauls this curried favor to Mr. Norwood's shop to find Mary, to start his life. March 15, thought to spark Miss M.N., but my Uncle C.C. was there. Did not do it. No matter the finality of his plans on paper, what becomes clear in the living world is that it is easier for William to push a cow from a bog than it is to carry on a conversation with the woman he loves. Oozing with awkward conduct, William avoids Mary for weeks, eventually deciding to court her where he is comfortable, alone and writing. March 27th, burn a letter, started a meeting, did not talk with M.N. She looked cross-eyed, come home to sleep. March 28th, skinned Mr. Norwood's cow, put out the fire at night. March 29th, in the morning hauled rails. Mother started to grandfather's. I went to writing a letter to M.N. Alarmed by fire, subdued it. Went to writing. Fire alarm, subdued it. Wrote a while. Went around the fire. Finished writing. Slept. March 30th, sent a letter to Miss M.N. Night by minor. The whole of William's life now hangs on a letter written in fits over 2 days. Then he waits. He works on the road. He visits his grandfather. He buys a gun. April 3rd, slept late. Heard that M.N. had received my letter on Thursday. It not returned. Had toothache.
Maybe wait. It's amazing. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our two authors this afternoon. And at any point, if you can't hear us, just wave, let us know. We want everybody in the back to be able to hear. Susan Gregg Gilmore is the author of 4 novels, all of which are rooted in her native South. Her most recent work, The Curious Calling of Leonard Bush, about a young boy struggling to make life normal again after his leg is amputated, is the winner of the 2025 Willie Morris Award for Southern Writing and Fiction. Her debut effort, Looking for Salvation of the Dairy Queen, was a 2009 Southern Independent Booksellers Association Book of the Year Award nominee. The Funeral Dress was called a revelatory novel that offers an evocative account of the lives of Appalachian working women by Kirkus Reviews. It was both a Target recommended read and a Target emerging author selection. Born in Nashville, Susan earned her undergraduate degree from someplace you might have heard of, the University of Virginia, and her Master of Arts from the University of Texas, Austin. She began her career as a staff writer for the Chattanooga News Free Press, and later freelanced for publications including the Los Angeles Times, Christian Science Monitor, and Garden and Gun. Jeremy B. Jones is the author of the nonfiction book Cipher, Decoding My Ancestors' Scandalous Secret Diaries, as well as the memoir Bear Wallow, A Personal History of a Mountain Homeland. Bear Wallow was named the 2014 Appalachian Book of the Year in Nonfiction and was awarded gold in the 2015 Independent Publisher Book Awards in Memoir. His essays have been published in Oxford American, Garden and Gun, The Bitter Southerner, and Brevity, among others. Jeremy earned his MFA from the University of Iowa and is a professor of English Studies at Western Carolina University in his native North Carolina. He also serves as the series co-editor for In Place, a a literary nonfiction book series from WVU Press. Welcome, both of you. So what we're going to do today, and I should say we're going to go a little past the 3 o'clock hour so we can get our full time with our authors in conversation. I have a few questions I'm going to ask each of them, both of them collectively, and then we really want to open this up for a conversation. But if people are shy, I have an endless array of questions I can ask. So we'll get started. So, sort of a general question for you both to start with. What does Appalachia mean to you as a writer, as a person, and how does that orientation shape your creative work?
I have way too many things in my hands, so I'm going to make a change before I spill some food. So, it's a hard question to start off with. Appalachia is a word that I never used until I went to college, unless I was talking about Appalachian State University. So the sort of notion of a region that extended beyond, say, like the county where I lived was not something I was conceiving of as a teenager. I remember this moment when I went to college and we had gone on like a day trip into the mountains. And I was sort of crossing a little stream on a log, and a couple of other students came behind me, and they both like fell in. And one of the other ones was like, "You can't follow Jeremy; he's a mountain man." And it was the first time I sort of had this notion that like, oh, is that a thing? Is there a mountain man? And so I would say that in some ways, my first book, Bearwall, I was most concerned with that question: what does it mean to be from a place, particularly the mountains? And more broadly, Appalachia. So at the risk of being long-winded, I'll just say that for me, what that's meant has been a real attachment, I think, to landscape and history. I remember when I moved to Iowa, and I had been living in Latin America just before I moved to Iowa, and Iowa was the most foreign place I'd ever been. Because I remember getting off the plane, it was night, you could see forever. And that felt so, just the feeling in my body is the thing that I was very aware of. And that's strange, that landscape can make you, feel things in your body. And so I'm very aware of that, and thinking about how mountains, shape us. And so for me, yeah, it's been about landscape, and then also about history, and sort of understanding the places we come from. Every place, of course, has a history, but for me, that's meant digging into all the layers that are there in terms of geology and family history and myth and all these sorts of things.
So, as you know, Appalachia is a really large area, as big as some European countries. And so there are those mountain areas where Jeremy is from, and also there are urban areas. And so I really grew up pretty much urban. Even though both of my parents, their parents, generations before them were deeply rooted in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina, Scotch-Irish descent, like you. And so the culture that I grew up was very Appalachian, and the music, the food, the religion, but yet I always felt a faith for some reason. Even though now I live in Chattanooga, I have for many years, where my parents are from, as I said, and when I sit in my office, I am literally surrounded by mountains, and yet I still felt like I was this faith when my friends started talking about Appalachia. And then I went to the the Swanee Writers Workshop. You may have heard of that. A very intense 2-week camp for writers, and I brought something to workshop that I thought, you brought something that needed work. Apparently that's not what you do. You bring something that is pretty perfect, so you hope someone's going to discover you. So let's just say that my workshop was pretty rough. And I didn't cry, because I was constantly writing, do not cry, do not cry. And at the end of that, one of the professors teaching, I will remain nameless unless you ask me later, then I'll probably tell you. He went through this whole critique and was pretty harsh, and at the end he looked at me, and I think he made judgments about are my people. And in that moment, I thought, enough, I've had it. And I looked at him and I said, you know what? They're my people too. And at that moment, I realized, you know, this was my history, my culture, and from that moment, I claimed it.
Can you both, and I probably should have asked this first, can you give us, we've gotten an introduction to certain scenes in your books, can you both give us the very brief intro for those who don't know about what your books are about?
How are we doing with this mic? It feels like it's in and out. Are you okay? Should we just share the one?
Yes.
No, you just have to lean in one direction. And then
I don't think it was on.
I turned it off when I passed it to you. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, what are our books about? I have never in my life had a book introduced by shadow puppetry. So Davey, thank you so much. That was so cool. I had no idea what to expect, and it was really amazing. The shortest version of the story that I can tell you about my book, Cipher, is that it's kind of part biography and part memoir. The biographical part tells the story of my fourth great grandfather, who you saw on screen here. He kept a diary for pretty much his whole adult life, from 1808 to 1859. He kept it in code because he did not want anyone to know lots of things about his life, including that he had many mistresses and tracked those affairs in his notebooks. Somehow, some way, 120 years after he died, they were discovered and then later decoded by a retired NSA analyst. So there's a much longer story there that's in the book, but I'll just tell you that piece. So in part, the book tells his story. The other part of the book, though, is, and the sort of conceit here is that I'm trying to understand my own life through the lens of his life. And so the big question, and I don't know if any of you are Ancestry.com or 23andMe buffs, but the question you run into eventually after the sort of sheen of the detective work wears off is, why does this matter? What does this mean to me? And so I think that's the question that sort of brings the memoir into the book, and that is, what does it mean to me to discover this life laid bare over 50 years? And so I sort of tell my story through and in connection to, and in some ways trying to distance from his story. And so they kind of weave together as the book goes along.
Beautifully, I might add. Yes, just Ancestry.com discovered my grandfather, the preacher, had a whole other family we never knew anything about, but that's another story for another day. Looking, the curious calling of Leonard Bush, about this 12-year-old boy who the book opens, he's lost his leg and he wants to bury it, as was so well illustrated. But what happens after that is not only do his own parents have to come to terms with great loss in their past, but the town thinks, wow, this kid has really moved on so beautifully. I want what he has. And so they would come to Leonard with symbols of their guilt and woe and shame and ask him to bury them in the same way that he had buried his leg, thinking that they could get a bit of this absolution and peace that Leonard had found.
I'll just say, I'm not sure if we're allowed to comment on each other's books, but but I think what's really remarkable about Susan's book is that it sounds and it's pitched like that it's full of trauma, and it of course is, but there's all this sort of mystery and magic and joy that surrounds this small community. And I think that's really fascinating how you kind of woven all those things together. So it's really a book that feels, I think magical is sort of the way that I would describe the blending of joy and kind of desperation and hardness.
Yeah. My agent always called Leonard the Ted Lasso of Appalachia. Right? He's just a happy, positive person.
And I should add, I'm biased because I'm sitting up here, but I read a lot of books as an author and as a person who participates, and both of these books are wholly original. Like, you read a lot of books that feel like something else you've read. Neither of these two books was like anything else I've ever read before, so kudos. So one question specific for Susan, and you kind of touched on it already. So we have this extraordinary opening moment in the book. Young Leonard is 12 years old. He's just lost his leg. He decides that his leg needs a proper burial, which is fascinating in itself. And then a series of seemingly miraculous events begins to follow from that. Can you talk to me a little bit about just how that leg funeral functions in the book, in the story, and what the miraculous might or might not mean as the story unfolds?
Well, I think I always have a funeral and a novel, and part of that probably is my grandfather, preacher background, and my dad really loved to plan a good funeral, and so I've been to a lot of them, and there's the ritual aspect of it that I find is what can be so healing and comforting, and so I think for Leonard that was what he needed, and what was the rest of that question? Oh yeah, thank you. Sorry. Okay. And what to other people seemed miraculous, though, it really wasn't. I mean, it was ritual and moving on and having faith in something greater. And I think for a lot of the people around him, though, they didn't see it that way. They thought he had a secret to something, a special charm or something that would help them let go of what they've been holding on to, which I know guilt really well, and I can do guilt really well, and I've had a lot of experience feeling guilty over things for a long time, and so that letting go process to me has always been fascinating, and how you finally get to the point where you can release it. And that to me was Leonard just had this ability to do that, which was miraculous to them. But in fact, it was all within their reach.
So a question specific for Jeremy. So one of the many things that your book does brilliantly is to record the life of, as you put it, your words, not mine, of a forgettable man in the 19th century. So William Presswood is, by all accounts, a very ordinary dude. He's not going to show up in the history books necessarily. He's not going to be the leader in any wars or anything else. He's sometimes fumbling, sometimes making mistakes. He's laugh out loud funny without intending to. In his diaries, I kept telling my husband, "You got to read this. Like, it's so intimate and humane." But there's something marvelous, I thought, about this approach of really writing about somebody that history has completely forgotten otherwise. What was writing about William like for you? What was that experience like, and why did you choose it?
Has anyone read Kaylee and Bradley's novel, The Ministry of Time? It's really pretty popular. One person. So I'll give you without any spoilers. So the novel is, and this is going to sound like it should fail, which is kind of my favorite genre of book. It sounds like it should fail and it works. But essentially, in Britain, they have discovered time travel, but they don't know how to use it. So they can go back in the past and pull people forward, but they can't take themselves out. So they start this program where they pull people from the past who are going to die otherwise, bring them to the future, and learn what they can from them. And so the novel is essentially someone whose job it is to acclimate a 19th century man to modern day life. And it becomes a love story, and it's complicated, and I would recommend the book. And I really loved it, and then I realized why is because I feel like this book for me was like bringing a 19th century man into the future and then trying to carry him around with me. Because I struggled to figure out how to write this book. It took essentially a decade. And so for the last 10 years of my life, this 19th century man who in some ways made me has been living with me all the time. And that has not always been great, but it's made me sort of see the world in a different way. And so it has felt like a kind of haunting or being inhabited, I think, by an ancestor. Deciding to write the book, I think, is the cliche is sort of like, I didn't choose it, it chose me. But it did feel that way a little bit, because even my discovering of the Diaries was purely accidental. I was actually looking for photos for my first book. And then we discovered this newspaper clipping that my grandma had saved for 40 years. And so I learned about it. I wrote an essay for Oxford American. I was like, I'm done with that. And then I just kept reading the diaries and thinking about these questions I didn't address. And so they were just kind of following me at all times. And I ultimately had to figure out what I thought about it. And the only way that I can kind of do that is to write about it, I think. And so, yeah, if you want to you know, imagine your ancestor standing in your kitchen with you while you like fry okra. That's what my life has been like, and you can maybe pull your ancestor into the future too.
So one more specific question for Susan. So I was particularly, and I promise I'm not doing any spoilers here, but Leonard's mother, June, becomes a key sort of moral centerpiece of the novel, the way I read it. Her capacity for change, her growing empathy, especially towards some who are kind of viewed as outsiders in the community. Talk to me about the process of June showing up in the book and what role she played in the overarching sort of thematics of your story. She seems so central, but sort of she came at it quietly. So tell me about June.
I really didn't like June in the beginning, but I knew we needed to spend some time together, a lot of time, also 10 years. This seems to be taking a decade. But what I came to understand about June is that she just was in pain, and she had suffered a lot of loss as a child, and that had never been resolved. And then Leonard's loss, you know, brought all that to the surface again for her. So I grew to have a lot of empathy for June, and June and I share a great love of cleaning. So June cleans a lot, and I understand that. My mother-in-law always said you just gotta have basic order first. So that was very much a part of me that I gifted to June, I think. But I ended up, by the end of the book, really feeling quite passionately about her and caring for her. And it's that was not something that I had planned. I don't script it out that well or outline it that well, but she just, over time, you know, we came to an understanding about one another.
Thank you. All right, one more specific question for Jeremy, and if you want to speak both. So, talk to me about, so your book is it's a history, it's a memoir, but in my view it's also a really deep dive, sort of a cultural analysis of Southern masculinity, past and present, how it's understood, how it's valued, what the codes are, requirements are. I thought that it was very incisive and very deep in those areas. Can you talk to me about how you, well, and one way that I noted it is, William, you note the only place in his diary that he notes that he cries is when one of his good friends or some sort of a male companion departs, and I found that really striking. Can you talk about how you understand William's self-awareness as a man of his time? He doesn't emote on the page. So how did you respect his privacy and also sort of understand his understanding of masculinity at this time? That's a rambling question, but I'm sure you'll know what to do with it.
Yeah, so William Prestwood was born just after the Revolutionary War ended, and he died just before the Civil War started. And so what I ultimately realized is his life was this really fascinating snapshot of Southern kind of American whiteness in the beginning of a new country that's just sort of figuring out what it is, and then immediately goes to war with itself over that idea. And so I read this book by a sociologist, Michael Kemmel, that kind of lays out these definitions of American masculinity and how, in some ways, the Declaration of Independence was a way of a nation sort of leaving its father and is also coding a kind of American masculinity that I saw showing up in William Prestwood's life. So this idea that we're trying to distinguish ourselves from the modes of masculinity from England and set out something new. And I wondered how that shows up in, 1811, and then also like in the line at the hardware store for me. And so I was really interested in that. At the time, I was also moving back to Western North Carolina, to Southern Appalachia, where I'm from, and kind of starting to notice things about, the men around me, my grandfather, my dad, and his brothers, and how those things, sort of show up. And I don't know what your experience has been in Appalachia, but for me, of those generation of men, there's almost a kind of quietness, an intention to sort of get out of the way, and be on the edge of things, never to take too much space, never to have too much light shining on you. And I was interested in that, and it's actually a criticism that the NSA analyst who decodes these diaries has about William Prestwood, is that he doesn't put himself forward. He finds him to be a really remarkable man who reads Greek and Latin, who dissects animals, who charts astrological, movements. He's doing all these remarkable things, but never puts himself forward. And the NSA analyst who decoded them felt like that was a real flaw. And as I read him, I started to really see the value in that, this idea that a life in the background could be a real life of value, and that a small life is an important life. And so that's how I started thinking about the masculinity kind of around me. There's a line in S.A. Cosby's most recent book, maybe not the most recent book, there's a line in an S.A. Cosby novel where the character is commenting on the boys who drive the jacked up trucks and put mud on them but have no use for the trucks themselves. There's some line about that. And I'm interested in like how that's changing in the place that I'm from. I think that like masculinity in its performance is often much louder, much more performative than it was for my dad and my grandfathers. And so I was just very aware of that as I was thinking about, kind of what comes after us too.
Thank you. Echo that. Having walked on the street yesterday to a young man starting to gun his motorcycle at the loudest possible decibel just for no reason, and he was alive and 21. So a question for you both. Both of your books entail the keeping and revealing of secrets of different sorts, especially in your book, Jeremy, but also a bit in Susan's. What role do you feel like secrets play in stories of Appalachia, and how does shame come into play, or how do you navigate the accompanying shame, whether for your characters or for trying to respect a character's or a historical person's privacy? Secrets and shame felt like they're part of that mix. So if you can both talk to me a little bit about how you sorted through that as you were writing.
I think you're probably better at this one because there was some secret keeping in mind, what people are bringing, but I think shame goes hand in hand with guilt, which I touched on earlier. And I grew up, my grandfather, as I said, was this revival-bred preacher, so he had a small church that when I spent my summers with them, I had a very different life experience. It was very rural, and my grandmother let me drive their big Pontiac Bonneville because the sheriff wasn't going to stop her because she was the preacher's wife. So I was 12 years old, hunkered down, driving this big old car to church. And but in that moment there, it was like, it didn't matter what you had done. If you walked down that aisle at the end of church, you were forgiven. If you would fall into my grandfather's arms, then we could, say amen and go have lunch. But it was all about letting go of the hurt and the pain, is what I came to understand watching people walk that walk and give their life over to a power greater than they are. So that, I think, was very powerful, had a very powerful effect on me growing up.
I like how you said I would be the expert on shame. I think, so my book is very much about secrets, obviously, because these diaries have been buried and then discovered and opened up. I think thinking through William's privacy, that's a conversation that I could have for a long time, because I'm not totally sure how I feel. But ultimately decided that his diaries had already been decoded, so I was just showing up late to the party and I'll write about them. But I think the thinking about secrecy and shame caused me to think a bit about history, and I'll admit to you that my depth of knowledge about 19th century American history was pretty much given to me by Coach Bonnet, who was my high school social studies teacher. That was all I had when I started this book, so I needed to do a lot of research. No shade to Coach Bonnet, but I did not know a lot beyond like when the War of 1812 happened. So I had to figure out a lot of things, and some of them I think really, for me, upset what I expected to be a really black and white reading of people living in the 19th century, of historical events, of the players. I mean, even that War of 1812, I was like, well, America and Britain, and it's like, no, there were so many more things happening. And so I think that the more that I let myself not put people in easy sort of good and bad categories or black and white categories, it made a lot of those secrets that may have kept me from making a more complicated narrative come to the surface and actually make me understand the place that I'm from more fully. You know, I think Appalachia is a place that we love to give a singular narrative to, and there's no way to do that if you start kind of unearthing some of these secrets about who we are, who is holding slaves and who isn't. You know, I think that those questions immediately make the narrative more complicated, and one way, and I guess this is a very kind of timely thing about how we look back at history and what we want to hear about it or not, but in my experience, letting that story be messier, letting those secrets come to bear, has only made my kind of attachment to the place that I'm from deeper, even if it's more complex. And so I think that we shouldn't sort of hide from these things in our historical searches. You know, shame without action is kind of pointless, but if you're feeling shame about things you're finding, then figure out what to do with that, you know, and then maybe it's not such a bad thing at first. So that was sort of my experience in digging around in his 19th century life.
I love that. I also appreciated the vulnerability in your writing when you were hoping to find something out about your ancestor and it didn't come out to be that way, and you allowing the reader to grapple with your own emotional response to realizing that he was not as perfect of a man as you had hoped he would be. It was really, really nicely done. One more question from me, and then we'll start opening it up for the audience. I know that you all have just tons and tons of free time in your daily lives. Can you talk candidly about the process of how and where you carve out time for sustained, deep creative work, or if you do, and what that's like right now in your lives? I think it's important that people understand authors have to do this in the midst of various obstacles.
This was a real struggle for me for this book. In the past, I had been able to focus on writing. Now I was working a full-time real estate career, still am. And so I used to be this morning writer who would get up and have all this great quiet time to be very reflective. And now I wake up worrying about performance deadlines and satisfying a demanding client. And for a long time in the beginning, it sucked the life out of me, and it definitely sucked that creative, reflective part of me literally out of my body. And I was writing, excuse me if there's children in here, but just like one shitty draft after another because I felt panicked. I thought, if I don't get something out there, the world is going to freak. Not that the world knew me, but if they had happened to see a book on a bookshelf, they would forget me. And it was painful. And finally, about 4 or 5 years in, I went to New York to see my agent because I wished I had nailed it. And she came into that restaurant, and before she even sat down, just shook her head. And that was the one time I started crying. And I cried all through breakfast. I cried walking back to the hotel, ran into a car. Happened to be my former editor, and cried, got in the car, cried some more. Anyway, what happened after that was I reached out to a really good friend who's a writing teacher, Darnell Arnott, who Jeremy knows, and was crying to her, and she said, send it to me. And the day my first grandson was born, I was in the waiting room at Sibley Hospital in Washington, D.C. She called and she said, okay, here are the 3 things that are wrong with it, and I mean, here are the 3 things that are right with it, and here is the long list of things that are wrong with it. And she said, you're gonna take my novel writing workshop. And I said, but this is my 4th minute. Nope, you're starting from scratch, novel writing 101. And I enrolled in a novel writing 101 workshop, and that was when things finally settled for me, and I was finally able to find the calm and to be at peace with Leonard. And that's why now, at my age, at 64, after this career that, you know, I just really struggled to get Leonard, something that I so believed in on the page, to have him named the Willie Morris Award winner, I gotta say, that feels pretty damn good. So, anyway.
So I'll say that Darnell, so we'll keep Darnell's voice in the conversation, used to run a literary festival at the Mountain Heritage Literary Festival. And at the start of it, everyone would gather in this auditorium. She would have everyone say, I am a writer, as a way to sort of claim this identity. If you're writing, you're a writer, whether you've published or not. So with that sort of context in mind, how many of you are writers or writing? Yeah, so you know, this may all be different for all of you, but I would say that for me, one, I'm glad that I do not depend on books to feed myself, because a decade-long book project is not going to do that. So having a day job is helpful in that regard. And two, I think, kind of to echo Susan, this is only my 2nd book. I'm working on my 3rd book now. Nothing about a previous book's experience has helped with the next book, it's felt like. It feels like everyone is a different beast, and you have to, in some way, become the person who can write that book. And you're giving over more than just time, you're giving over sort of a sense of who you are and how you're thinking about the world. And a lot of, I think, what took so long for this book was figuring out what questions to ask and who I was in relationship to the book. And I have also just become a really inefficient writer. Like, I don't know how to make it any different. I sort of struggle sentence by sentence on the page, and I cannot write in little pockets of timing. And so I'm a professor in my day job. My attempt is to kind of like block off most of one day, and I tell my students I will not check email on this day, and I will just sit for hours to try to get a few pages. Generally, that means like the pages are like pretty good when I'm done, but I'm not throwing out a draft and coming back to it. I'm painstakingly kind of moving through things. But I'll just say the last thing that's been super helpful for me thinking about shame and guilt is that not all writing is writing, and so sometimes reading, going for a walk, watching a film, like these things are all part of that process, and so letting yourself off the hook, you don't have to be staring at the blinking cursor to be writing. There are all kinds of things that are helping you become the person who knows how to write the book that you're trying to write.
Thank you both. Let's open it up for audience questions. I think if you can just call out your question, raise your hand, I can repeat it so make sure everybody hears it. Do you have any questions from the audience? No, I have more I can ask. Yes. Go ahead.
Oh, I have some questions, 2 related questions about the diaries. It was really interesting to me that he wrote them in code. So is your assumption that he never intended for anyone to ever read them, understand them, or even find them? That was my other question. Were they literally hidden somewhere?
So the question is about the codes of the diaries. Was that his intention for nobody to read them, and were they hidden?
So it's kind of warm in here and the lights are off, so kudos to you for being awake back there. Thank you so much. I have some guesses. He, as I mentioned, had lots of affairs, and so the easy guess is that he kept them in code because he didn't want anyone to know about his mistresses. He had different symbols for different women that he would use in his pages. But what complicates that a little bit is when he's 20 years old, his dad comes barging into his room at midnight looking for gin. His dad is a drinker. They get in this big argument, and he writes in his diaries, I told him one roof would not hold us both if he done like he done again. And the next day is when he comes up with this cipher and starts putting all of his diaries into that code. So there's something about his relationship with his dad that seems really central as well. The question of did he intend anyone to read them is a really, I think my first answer would be no. But the follow-up sort of wrinkle on that is why did he keep them? And why not just burn them immediately? Or why keep them at all? My suspicion is that, to sort of keep a diary is to really create a sort of static memory. And so it allowed him to go back and look at things and remember the past. The discovery of them is also a mystery. They were found in a house about to be demolished about 100 miles from where he lived and died. The house had belonged to a woman with no real connection to him. It was not like a descendant. There are some guesses that I have about how they got there, but none of them is especially satisfying. So somehow, over the course of 120 years, they migrated 100 miles, somehow were salvaged. They're these small hand-sewn notebooks. And then even after that woman died and her house was about to be demolished, they were set on the curb to be thrown away, and someone spotted them, picked them up, and thought, these seem old, I wonder what they are. And then, even that, for 3 years, he took them to historical societies and libraries, and people were like, we don't know, buddy, and sort of pushed him aside. So that took 3 years to find a person who said, I don't know, but I know a guy, and then they got to the hands of this NSA analyst. So they should have been forgotten so many times and thrown away so many times, and somehow, persisted. And in some ways that I think has made me feel a little bit better about writing about them, is that they're, not to get too touchy-feely about it, but they've survived for so long that I would like, to be able to put them on the page in some form.
I'd have wanted to be told sort of subversive. Other questions? Yes?
Jerry, Williams' entries are very, both deliciously and frustratingly brief. What was the experience like? I know you're searching through these and sort of finding secrets about yourself, but how did you process the very quick bombs that he drops with so little detail?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I first found out about the diaries, as I said, I just finished my first book. I sent a screenshot of them to my agent and said, hey, I just learned about these diaries, I'm thinking about writing about them. She said, that's great, you should write a novel. Because in her mind, I had this source material from which I could draw and sort of tell this bigger fictional story. And I think for a lot of writers that would have made sense. That wasn't what interested me about them. I found, it is true, they're very short. My favorite one I won't say because it's probably not appropriate in public, but just to give you a sense, a full day's entry for one day says plowed, most drunk. That's the whole day. That's all he recorded for that whole day. So he's not being introspective and reflective and really laying things down. He's kind of logging what seems important about his life. But I found this just sort of almost beauty or poetic syncopation, some of them. Like one of them is went to a frolic, went to fiddle. I don't know, that feels like a little pretty to me. But I was also just interested, of course, in what do these mean and how do they connect to me, naturally. So to give them life was a little complicated because I had to admit that when I was reading between the lines, I was also probably filling that in with what I wanted to be true. And so I think that's how this reflexive kind of property of the diaries came to be, is I was making sense of his life. I also sort of filtering it through mine. And of course there are lots of parts that are not that interesting, and then figuring out how to give them some life when he's just writing, or kept school, or there's not a lot happening until there is. So spending a lot of time in them until they became their own kind of story, I think really helped me get some hold over it and tell it.
Any other questions? Yes.
I was just wondering if being and identifying as Appalachian writers, whether you feel like that has helped or hindered your career.
So the question is, does being or identifying as Appalachian writers help or hinder your career?
Yikes. That's really tough. because honestly, I kind of go back and forth in my own head about that. I don't know what else to write though. I mean, I lived in Los Angeles for 12 years of my life, but I don't feel that I know it well enough to write about it. So I don't know that it will change what I write, but I mean, I have had a few people come up to me and say, well, you know, if you write about someplace else, you might sell more books. And, you know, that does kind of get into your head a little bit and you think about it, but I have to love what I write. It's a long, long relationship. And I love Leonard, and I can't imagine him being from any other place. I don't think he would have been who he was had he been from someplace else. So, I don't know. Tough question.
I think it's definitely complicated because, you know, there are parts of the country where you can be a regional writer, and then there are other parts of the country where, like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not a New York writer, but you can be a Southern writer. And so I think there's a way in which that regionalism can cut, it can kind of narrow you, it can suggest that you're only going to write about certain things and sort of put you in a corner. And so to be called any kind of adjective and then writer is in a way complicated and maybe something to resist. But I will say about the region from which, you know, we're writing, there are so many writers to look at and sort of model your work after. I find it to be a really supportive and kind of open community. You know, I teach with the novelist Ron Rash. Every time I talk to him, he's reading somebody else's book to blurb it. You know, it's a very welcoming community, and so to be a part of that community is really uplifting, even if I think at a sort of national stage, to be called a Southern writer or an Appalachian writer, maybe puts you in a box that you're always having to push yourself out of.
So I have had a real affection for Ron Rash for like 20 years. He knows this. I've told him. He has never blurbed anything for me. So when you go back to Western Carolina and you tell him, I said, hello.
Maybe he has a secret blurb that he hasn't sent me or something.
Any other questions? We have several more. Right here. Sam.
I have plenty of questions, but I'm intrigued now. Do that. Both from the culture evaluation, is there a particular perspective of that culture you're trying to convey in the book?
Question is there a particular perspective on Appalachian culture that you're trying to convey in your books?
Not at first. I mean, I think it's often a recipe for failure if you know what you're going to say, you know, sort of in a political or social way when you start writing. But I think as I got into the book and as I started writing it, I really wanted to complicate some easy narratives about Appalachia, in particular about its connection to and history with enslavement. It is true that in Western North Carolina, something like 8% of the population were enslaved people, and you compare that to the eastern part of North Carolina where it's upwards of, you know, 50, 60. But it's so easy to tell a story about the place you're from that has no connection to that part of our past, and I think that's especially dangerous, and I, of course, you know, get into that in the book. And so I would say that one thing I hope that my book does is just kind of like mess up the easy history of Appalachia, while also valuing its beauty. I mean, I find there are two, and this is what I write about in my first book, there are two really easy kind of stereotypes of Appalachia. There's the like Barney Fife Appalachia, where everybody's sort of good-natured, maybe they're connected to the land, not the smartest. And then there's the like Ernest T. Bass Appalachia, if you only doing this with Andy Griffith analogies apparently, which is like the rough and tumble, breaking windows, you know, like has no culture. And it's really easy to have one of those two, and it's tempting even for people from Appalachia to say like, we're all good, wizened mountain people. And so I think anytime I can complicate that, it's something that I'm trying to do.
Right in front. Go ahead. the question is essentially advice for those who are using historical diaries to begin a new writing project.
What he did in that book, to me, was amazing. It reminded me kind of a graded essay where, but where he weaves in, oh wow. He weaves in the journal with his own experience, with history. It was so beautifully quilted together that honestly, I really never read any work as well done as that. We're pulling all these different pieces together. So she needs to read this book.
I think that's when you dropped the mic. So I was supposed to, thank you, that's so nice. I mean, I guess I would say it's a little easier for me because these were so far off. So I had no real connection to him. I wasn't worried about upsetting other family members. So I think that gets messy. I always point people to Mary Carr's book, The Art of Memoir. She has a chapter in there about writing about people you love, and I think it's a really great kind of template for setting up some rules for yourself. You know, the thing that I've been thinking about a lot, I just read Deborah Jackson Taffa's memoir called Whiskey Tender. It's about growing up Yuma and sort of living on and off reservations in the Southwest. And she does this thing in there that I think Gregg does really well in his book, All Over By the Shoutin', if anyone's read any of those books. But they're really interested in this kind of representativeness that a particular story might lend to a region or a place or a kind of story. And I was really cognizant of that, trying to think about how history and how all these other things might not only contextualize, but also become a part of that story. So those are two books I would recommend, even though they're not about diaries. You know, Bragg's book is about his grandfather who died before he was born, so he never met him. He's only collecting, you know, sort of oral histories to tell that story. But they're both really stories about a particular history and a particular culture. So that's what I would say, is think about representativeness. Like, what is the story that you're telling? Is it a particular kind of immigrant story? And how can you both be aware of that, but also maybe lean into that? I don't know. I mean, there's no one way to do it, I think, is the hard thing. But such a gift, you know, to have those diaries. Do y'all know about Terry Tempest Williams' book? It's called When Women Were Birds. And the story here is basically when her mom was dying, she called Terry Tempest Williams into the room and said, "When I die, I want you to have my diaries." And she said, "Mom, what are you talking about? I didn't know you kept diaries." And she said, "Yeah, they're in this room, on this shelf. When I die, I want you to have them." She died. Terry Tempest Williams goes to this room, finds them on the shelf, pulls them down. Every single one is empty. There's nothing. There's nothing in there. She's like, "What does it mean?" And so that's a book maybe to think about. But I think, like, yeah, taking someone else's life as it's been pinned down is a difficult, but kind of rewarding journey.
So we have time for just one or two more questions. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so when you are building your novel, which is a decade, I guess, do you suggest any type of exercises, like writing exercises, or is it a physical activity or visualization or something, in order to feel close to these characters and showing them, or in terms of starting?
So the question is best practices or exercises to get into your characters as you're starting.
Yes. So, you know, you can't always just like sit down and write, right? But you want to be working on your novel. You want to be getting to know your characters. So this is something that I do with all of them. I'll take Leonard, and then I'll go through my other primary and then sometimes secondary characters. 100 things that Leonard loves. Leonard loves chocolate ice cream on a Sunday afternoon. And then 100 things Leonard doesn't like. Leonard hates vanilla ice cream with chocolate syrup on it. And then, I mean, it can be that mundane or that specific, and then I will juxtapose a love and a hate, and then do a free write for 15 minutes based on that contradiction. That one's really helpful, and just getting to know them, just doing these long lists, and just, you know, Leonard does not like writing with a number 2 pencil. He only wants to use blue ink. I mean, it really doesn't, but all of that, I get to know that character. And then free writing, which is something that I used to do, kicking and screaming. When someone would give, at a writing workshop, give you a prompt and then you have to free write and then you have to read it, which just felt so painful. But now I love it. Something comes out of that every time I do it. And you can take 15 minutes and do a free write any morning. I mean, I should. I don't do it every morning, but don't do what I do what I say.
Yeah, I took a class one time in graduate school that was a lot of prompts, and one of the prompts was to write about a place when you were in a moment and you would have rather been anywhere else. And there was a student in the class who really hated in-class prompts, and so he wrote about the moment we were in. Like, he really hated to be writing those prompts. And then of all the people in the class that could be called on to read, the professor called him, and he had to read this thing about hating being in her class right now. But I will say that was a class where I too, I like to think that the thing I'm writing is going to matter. It's going to show up in the book. But almost everything I wrote in that class turned into something useful. So I would say getting out of the notion that when you write something, it has to show up word for word in the final version, but it's still helping you. Like, those things help a lot too. But I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to write a novel right now, and I have no idea what I'm doing, so I don't know that I have good advice to that question.
I can actually give you advice from your own book, right back at you, which one thing I sort of wanted to wrap up with is Jeremy has a scene in the book where he has a meeting with Wendell Berry, the famous writer and ecologist and farmer, and Wendell Berry tells you that he doesn't believe in hope. And he says instead something to the effect of, it's too easy to have false hopes. All that most of us can really do is find the problem in front of us and get to work there. Find the need where you live. I love that and thought about it and what that means for us as writers and what it means for us in our daily work. So find the need where you are and start there. We have time for one last question, no pressure. So the question is, when the book is over, do you keep sort of living on with either your characters or the historical people, and how do you deal with it?
That's a good question, and I've really never been asked that, but actually I get rather depressed. And I didn't know that would happen the first time. But I've lived with these people so intensely. I mean, you would think writing would be a lonely thing, but it's not, because I have all these wonderful people in my life. And I would call my daughters to the dinner table when I was working on my first novel, and then I'd call Catherine Grace and go, hey, she's married. I mean, so when I finished, which I thought would be such a joyful day, and it was kind of, but then I was just very sad and lonely. And not so much with the second book, but the third book, I grieved those women for a good year. And it took me almost a year before I could write another book, because I was just having a hard time letting go. So Leonard and I, we were on a different path, having spent a decade together. So we are still friendly, but I haven't been pained. And actually, the novel I'm working on now is about little Henry, which I didn't see coming, but I know, it's so sweet. So anyway, I still get to hang out with him.
My guy dies in 1859, so that makes it a little easier. I know it's coming, but I will say he's still, I write about this moment in the book where I'm doing the dishes and I hear geese calling out at night, and it never occurred to me that geese migrate at night. And I was like, what is it like for, if you're a goose flying over all these lit up houses? But the only reason I know that I noticed that was because I was doing the dishes, thinking about an entry in Presswood's Diaries where he writes about sowing oats for geese. And I'm like, what does that mean? Is he trying to lure them in? What is he doing? So just this way in which he's constantly inhabiting me was making me notice or kind of hear things or see things. And so I know that's not going to go away, even if I'm kind of ready to be done with him after 10 years. He's still kind of embedded in there.
Now I'm going to give a brief closing spiel, and then we'll conclude the spin. So You will now have the opportunity to purchase a book. I hope you will purchase both the books. They're well worth the read and have it signed. So our book signing tables are right up at front. We'd also like to let you know that if you're registered as a festival participant, you'll receive an email with a survey. Festival staff really love this feedback as they plan, they take it into account, so please do consider responding. And finally, if you're staying for the next panel here, we ask that you please allow the site coordinator to scan your registration for that panel. On behalf of all of us, thank you, Jeremy and Susan. This was inspiring and your work is inspiring. Thank you very much. And then go sit in the warm car. Sounds like